welcome to episode 4 of the Planning Pulse. I'm Sam Batchelor, the Development Manager here at Wilton District Council, and today I'm joined by Stacey Robbins.
Hello everyone.
The main topic of the Pulse today is going to be the changes that come in at the end of April arising from the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act and which relate to planning enforcement matters. We're going to chat through those in a moment, but before that we wanted to update you on matters relating to the emerging local plan and our Regulation 18 consultation. So Stacey, over to you.
Yeah, thanks Sam. And as listeners probably know, this is a very quick reminder, we are partway through the regulation consultation. So this is the public consultation on the emerging local plan. So you can see that online. But the reason for mentioning it is that we are now halfway through the in-person consultation events. Had several of those. And they continue this Saturday in Crowborough on the 20th of April at Crowborough Community Centre, which is in Pine Grove in Crowborough, and that's 10 till 4. And then next week on Monday the 22nd, we are at East Hoathly in the Village Hall on Church Marks Lane, and that's 2 until 8 o'clock. And then on Tuesday next week, 23rd of April, we are up at Frant in the Memorial Hall, which is on the Green in France, and that's 2 till 8. And then finally, on Saturday the 4th of May, is the last in-person consultation event, and that's at Horham Village Hall, which is obviously in the centre of Horham, as listeners will know, and that's 10 till 4. So do come along and see us and have a chat to the team. Any questions about the emerging strategy and the policies, or any questions around using the consultation portal, the team are very, very happy to answer any questions. And finally, and very quickly, just a reminder that the consultation closes at 5 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of May.
Brilliant. And of course I was listening to what you were saying then, but did you just update about the local plan stuff that's available online?
Well, I think listeners do know there's a wealth of information that's online, including a couple of videos which I've watched several times just because they're really helpful, and there is a sort of walkthrough on how to use the consultation hub, which has caused a bit of confusion, but actually unnecessarily so. I think if people watch the video, which is on YouTube, and have a listen, then that answers a lot of questions, as does the separate FAQ, list of FAQs. And the other thing which to plug, seeing as you've mentioned, Sam, is that there is still the virtual exhibition, which is excellent resource, which is a sort of, just that, virtual exhibition which you can walk into and you can approach exhibition boards, which is set up like a physical exhibition, which we are doing in the in-person events.
Brilliant. It was that last bit in particular, the virtual exhibition, that I was thinking about. So that was a good prompt. Okay then, so the main thing that we were going to cover with you all today were some changes that are to be introduced following the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which was a piece of legislation that was made last year. And those changes being related to our planning enforcement powers. There's quite a few things that are covered there. So I'll start with a few. Stacey, you'll chip in with some others, but let's just go through them. So,
I was just going to say, just as a sort of introduction, I mean, these are sort of long time coming, aren't they? And they come under the umbrella, I think, of tightening enforcement regime and providing stronger powers to councils and local planning authorities. And that's why I think it's topical, and I think listeners will probably be quite interested to hear about these changes.
Yeah. So firstly, quite a big one for us are time limits. So this isn't time limits in the same way that we talk about when we issue plan permissions. This is about instances in which there's been a breach of planning, so development has gone ahead without a relevant plan permission being in place. And previously, the law made reference to two different time periods. One was a 4-year period, and that mostly related to instances in which a new dwelling house had been created, or sometimes when there'd been certain types of operational development, so essentially some types of built form. But then there was also a 10-year period as well, and that 10-year period related to other types of breaches, be it breaches that related to conditions not being complied with or other types of change of use. Well, that's been reviewed, and now the time period, the 4-year time period that is, has been scrapped, and all breaches of planning control are now subject to a 10-year period. So that means that anything that we identify as being unlawful, whereas some of those things, the cut-off of 4 years might meant that we found out about it too late, the extended period of being up to 10 years means that there might be types of breaches of planning that happen now that we'd have a bit more control over and be able to take action against.
Yeah, and it's a good way to set it all out. And I think having a single, much longer time period for breaches of control, I think, is probably welcome from those that have seen unauthorised activity. But just a very quick cut into that point, one of the exemptions to this change in the legislation is where the development is what's called substantially complete on the 4-year rule prior to the changes at the end of the month. So I can see some fun and games, unfortunately, where people argue that it was complete prior to the main change in legislation, but we'll have to, I think, cross that bridge when we come to it.
Okay, so moving on, the other thing that's changed are the penalties that apply when we're able to, I suppose, successfully demonstrate that there has been a breach of planning in some way. Now, one of the benefits of there being a change with the penalties, which essentially, in this instance, are financial fines that have all been upped in some way, shape or form, can be seen as a kind of a way of making sure that breaches in the future don't happen, because the deterrent in terms of being a greater fine is now there. But just to kind of go over some of those, the main changes as we see it are that the penalty for non-compliance with a breach of condition notice, so these are notices that we serve when planning permission has been granted, and you'll be familiar with the fact that planning permissions are granted to certain conditions. When they're breached, we can serve these breach of condition notices, has now increased from a previous cap of £2,500 to now an uncapped fine. And obviously the fine there will relate, I suppose, to the nature and scale of the breach, and so something to be considered moving forward. The penalty for non-compliance with a Section 215 notice, and so those not familiar with 215 notices, these are notices that we can serve on land or property which we don't consider as being maintained to an adequate standard and is otherwise affecting the amenity of a local area. If that notice isn't complied with, so the land isn't tidied up or the building isn't brought into a kind of fit for purpose state, then that fine has increased from £1,000 and again to an uncapped fine. And then the daily fine for non-compliance with court orders has increased from £100 to £500.
Yeah, absolutely. So whether that does, as we say a moment ago, act as a deterrent, we'll have to see. We'll watch this space. And the next one, Sam, is something new, isn't it? I don't think it's just, well, not that I don't think, it's something that we don't actually have at our disposal at the moment, and it's something called enforcement warning notices. So do you want to tell listeners what's involved there? Yeah,
so it probably covers something that all LPAs did in some shape or form, and that is issue correspondence to those that have contravened, but it formalises it, and it therefore means that there are things that we can act upon if what we've set out in these enforcement warning notices hasn't occurred. So essentially, where there's been unlawful development and the LPA considers that there's a reasonable prospect that planning permission would have been granted if it had been applied for in the first place, then we can serve one of these enforcement warning notices, and it can require that a retrospective planning application is made, and that if that planning application is not made within a specified time frame, then we can follow up with further enforcement action if needs be. The scope for appeals against these notices is quite strict, and there's only really one opportunity to obtain that plan permission retrospectively. So like I said, that's an approach that we would have taken when dealing with some breaches, to try and encourage people to regularise something that we considered maybe had some merit, but nonetheless go through the planning application process to check that and seek public view on that as well before granting a planning permission. But these notices kind of formalise that process.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting and perhaps a long time coming. I mean, one of the benefits here is, as you say, is to set out a definitive time frame. We can all think of instances where there's been discussions and we could see the likelihood of a regularising application being granted, all other things being equal, but that might not come forward for months and months and months. And meanwhile, you've got a lot of angst locally. And so this, I think, looks effective as a way of drawing things to conclusion much faster, and that we at the council would be driving that timeline. So, yeah, it looks like a good change.
And then lastly from me, before I hand the baton to Stacey to go through some of the other enforcement updates, and that relates to temporary stop notices. So temporary stop notices are something that local authorities have always been able to issue. We can only do so in certain instances, but one of the benefits of the change here is that there's been a change in the duration of a temporary stop notice. So previously, if we issued one, it related to a time period of 28 days. That's now increased to 56 days. But there's also been powers introduced to serve temporary stop notices in relation to works carried out to listed buildings that have been undertaken without a necessary listed building consent. So it opens up the possibility of us being able to better protect heritage assets where people are undertaking work that they don't have consent for.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? When you say that out loud, Sam, and you describe the benefits of it, people will probably think that we've had that for a long time, and we haven't. So, a long time coming, probably. All right, the last couple of changes are definitely worth noting and commenting upon. There is the prospect at the end of the month of, not the prospect, it's absolutely happening, there's a requirement for development commencement notices. And this is really quite interesting because at the moment we have these commencement notices, but only in a narrow range of circumstances. And it's where there's a CIL charge. And if there's a CIL charge or a CIL chargeable form of development, then those that are implementing the development have to give us a notice of commencement. But from the end of April, all development that requires and has got planning permission, there is a requirement for people to issue a development commencement notice. So we have to be given that, which specifies a date when the works will begin. Now, if the actual commencement date differs from the date that's given on the first development commencement notice, then we must be notified of that different date. Yeah. And the failure to do so means that we could serve a notice requiring the information, and then non-compliance with such a notice would result in a fine of up to £1,000. Now, slightly nervous about this insofar as catching a lot of people out, because it is something new and people probably don't think that they have to do this. So we are going to do some comms on this and some information on the website in order to draw attention to this. We've also changed the notes at the end of the notice of decision. Those are already on there and have been for a week or so. The other thing to mention is we tried to make it as easy as possible. So there's an online form on the website which we'll leave a link to below so that people can complete that information as quickly and as painlessly as possible. We don't want to trip people up unnecessarily and have this prospect of a fine where there's just it's kind of just happened in ignorance. So we are going to draw attention to this new requirement.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say that we've got no plans to be particularly heavy-handed with it. However, it is new, and there is a benefit in us receiving these notices, because if you look at the explanation around why they've been introduced, it really does help us with keeping track of development that's coming forward in our district, which from a public interest point of view is really good, because it helps everyone keep abreast of the type of development coming forward and the speed at which it's being delivered, which we know is really key and something that people really want to know about in our area.
So I was going to say some stuff about completion notices, but actually I think it's quite dry and probably won't bite too hard, and actually it's probably a separate pulse in and of itself, because we often get comments about, as partially completed development and should we serve a completion notices. There has changed, and perhaps we'll walk through that on a different pulse. But just very quickly, because I think it is of interest insofar as quite high profile, and there's been quite a bit of media discussion around the last point we were going to mention, which is this non-implementation of planning permission. Now the Act does now allow councils to refuse planning permission where an applicant has previously submitted or has been connected with a planning permission within the council's area, which is either not commenced or, and this is the interesting bit, the development has been unreasonably slow. Now this is really quite interesting, and as I say, there's some media attention to it a year ago or so when the government consulted on this. This is the whole use it or lose it type provision, and I said there's not a huge amount of information around this. It's literally as I just read out. So whether it lands and there's sort of loads of litigation and loads of appeals around this, I rather suspect there could be. I can also see a situation where developers argue that they're not actually connected with the subject site, where we try to kind of lasso them into a situation where we say, well, you were involved and it either didn't commence or it commenced really very slowly. So this last one strikes me as kind of giving with one hand and potentially taking it away with the other. But yeah, interesting.
Indeed. Well, thanks, Stacey, for just covering those last few points. And that's it for now. We hope that you found this useful, but please remember that if you do have any ideas for future episodes, to let us know. But yeah, bye for now.
Yeah, bye all. See you soon.